So to now speak on the matter at hand, or on hand. Nana, the new alternative Nigerian architecture. Today, I'm not really actually going to be speaking about buildings per se, it's not to talk about buildings at all. It is about what I would call a belonging, and a way of how architecture helps us to remember who we are, The thing about it is, I've always wondered if architecture has an accent, there is a language, but does it have an accent? And that if it could speak, what language would it speak in Lagos, in Liverpool, and anywhere else for that matter? What kind of language or what accent would it speak? Funny thing about my journey to here, to Liverpool, is that back in the 60s, my parents came in to Liverpool by ship. And then, they relocated, well, I don't know if they relocated, but they moved to Manchester, which is where I was born. And I was born in Manchester. I spent the first few years, maybe like 5 years of my life in the UK before relocating to Lagos, Nigeria. And I spent my young years, and then I did my secondary school in Lagos, Nigeria, until it became difficult for me to gain admission into a school of architecture in Nigeria. I really wanted to do architecture, but it just didn't happen. We have a system where after you've done your 5th form, you now take a JAM examination. And, I wasn't necessarily a brilliant student. I think I was very playful. So that sort of didn't make it easy for me to gain admission into a school of architecture, like a lot of people did. So I took matters into my own hands and said to my parents, because my mother raised us as a single mom, and I said, Mom, because we used to come for summer holidays. And I remember this one in 1980, I think 82, 83. And I said, I'm not going back to Lagos. I'm just going to stay here and just find my way into a school of architecture. And the first 2 years of me coming back to the UK, I went and did a BTEC course in building studies. And I thought that was actually a way to sort of give me some type of foundation in the built environment, which it did. But I was a very good art student from my Nigeria days that, it became something that I was dead keen on ensuring that whatever it took, I was going to gain admission into. The word architecture for me is just something that it lifts up my spirit, so therefore it became something that, a quest that I needed to achieve. So in returning to the UK and starting my training as an architectural student, it wasn't as easy as I thought because, the challenges of coming to the UK from Nigeria, having been a very average student, it meant that, dealing with the course itself was a bit of a challenge for me. But nonetheless, I persevered and I was able to, finish the course. I did my BA at the South Bank University. It was actually a polytechnic at the time. And then I went out and did my year out for a couple of years before returning to do my postgrad diploma. After doing that, I went into full-time employment. Actually, that's not true. Sorry, it was during the recession that I finished my diploma. So there wasn't any work at the time. So I went and did a master's in computing and design at the East London University. That was something just to help me gain, because I think at that time it was still very analog in terms of, how people worked in an office. People were still using drawing boards and stuff like that. But long and short, I was able to go past all this, and I embarked on a very interesting architectural journey that I think I worked for like about 10, 15 years before I now returned back to Lagos, Nigeria. By the time I returned back to Nigeria, I think the understanding and the style and the language of architecture that was, what I understood and what I had been able to sort of like get my teeth into at the time. It was very modern, School of Architecture, we were like learning more about the old masters. But that basically led me to have a language that I was speaking then, which I would call was very modern. I loved the Japanese language. That was something that really sort of like captivated me in terms of like the minimalistic approach, the cultural approach, and things that were, very important to me. That I think it sort of like became somewhat engraved on my psyche, that to sort of like do architecture, there's a way to approach it, and I think it served me well. So getting back to Nigeria back in the early 2000s, after my spell working and going through the process, I think I got back into Nigeria with this sense of I have arrived. I'm going to make a difference, because I looked at the landscape at the time and I felt that it wasn't speaking to me, I guess because of what I had been used to in the UK. So getting back into Nigeria, it didn't necessarily dawn on me in the early years. I mean, I met the likes of Chuka, who is here with us today, who was introduced to me by my business partner, Patrick. And I think at that time, we weren't really familiar with what was going on in the architectural space, but I knew what Chuka was up to. I had seen a lot of his work via, people sharing some of his work with me, that it resonated because I think to a large extent we come from the same school of thought. But I felt that something was missing, as I was going on, something felt missing, that I was in search of whatever it was that was missing. Unfortunately, we didn't have people to look up to when I arrived. It was just my contemporaries that I guess I could relate with, and there wasn't that sort of what I would call the old guards embracing us because they always felt that they knew it all. So it was a bit of a challenge to sort of like, find people to have as a mentor. I think people like Chuka, who had gone back much earlier than I did, had the likes of John Godwin, who was able to instill a certain language, I guess, that I guess it sort of like represented the school of thought that Chuka came from. But anyway, it now started to dawn on me that my architecture is so out of context because the architecture that I was doing when I first moved back to Nigeria could have been placed anywhere. And I think it was just some kind of laziness on my part, really, that made that the case. It wasn't really because I couldn't have done something different. I think there was a lot of laziness. I think it was a bit of showboating as well. So context never really was important. Long and short, I just felt something was missing. And it took a long while before I actually noticed that what was missing was really under my nose. I remember going to a little town outside of Abeokuta. A friend of mine had asked us to, visit some old village where they were selling land. And the picture that I'm going to share with you now, first of all, sorry, I wasn't using the pictures on the screen to sort of like talk about what I have to say today, but the picture that you can see on the screen right now is actually pictures that are trying to, explore this nuance of the one on the left is Merseyside, Liverpool. The one on the right is Victoria Island. And when you're looking at it from this view, this could be anywhere in the world, We know where this is because we're in the city, but this could be anywhere. So it becomes like this, how do you speak to the context from an urban sort of like position? And can we go to the next slide, please? Next slide. So this little boy that I took this picture. It was a little village outside of Abeokuta. Abeokuta is a city in Ogun State, which is in the western region of Nigeria. And I took this picture and it just really kind of hit a chord because I said to myself that this young boy lives in this mud house. What are his experiences? What is he? What's developing in his mind when it comes to the space that he lives in, And so I started to sort of like, question it. So it was like, as I said, a cultural awakening. Next slide, please. that it started to make me ask myself questions, about identity, materiality, culture, context, fostering a deep connection between architecture and the rich tapestry of Nigerian heritage. And I wasn't really thinking about this when I first moved back. It was just nothing that was on my mind. And I feel really bad that I can admit to it, that, it took me a while as an architect to be grounded in the context and in the environment. And I'm hoping that it wasn't because I was out of Nigeria for the formative years of me being an architect that sort of like led to that. But I hope not. Next. I think I've jumped over a little bit, but it was part of this thing about wanting to know, because we all have responsibilities as architects to make some kind of difference to the built environment. Difference that is going to serve the users, the environment, and everybody that comes into contact with the architecture that one is making. So having seen that young boy, and that young boy made me question myself about what is it that I have to do as an architect to, speak to the environment that I'm in, led to an opportunity that came with the mosque. The mosque project actually was something that the client, Crescent Bearers, they're like what I would call an organization that was set up in 1939, and their objective at the time was obviously to see how they could. When they set up, it was a situation where a lot of people that were going into schools had to change, from being Muslims to Christians, so that they could get into some of the schools that were set up by the missionaries. So they set this organization up so that, Muslims could get an education without having to change their religion. So this project had come to us in the office, I think in 2011. By the way, I haven't represented any of the projects that I worked on from when I moved back to Nigeria up until here, because, the importance of trying to be able to speak a language that is important to me is why this presentation is the way it is. But nonetheless, this was the first project that came up at the time that gave me an opportunity to say, okay, you know what? How do I showcase my responsibilities as an architect? And how do I sort of like, listen to the questions that I was asking when I saw that little boy in front of that building? So when the project was given to us, or when we were commissioned to do the project, it wasn't really about creating what Abijo Mosque ended up becoming. It was just to design a mosque. But what was interesting about the project was that after some time, the client had said, well, we can't really afford anything, we couldn't afford to execute the design that we had done originally. That can we scale down, and can we sort of like reduce the size of the project? And we did. And over time, they kept asking us to keep going down in size. And in the end, that project was almost like, well, is there any point in carrying on? But something just spoke to me. I'm a Muslim, so I felt that, okay, I have a religious responsibility to sort of like, see the project through. But once we broke ground on the project, it just didn't make sense, in the sense that it was meant to be a community project or community mosque. And it wasn't going to serve the community as well as it would if it was left as per the design that the client had sort of asked us to go ahead with. Long and short, I offered the client an opportunity whereby I will use my own money to increase the size of the mosque. And I think what that enabled me to do really was gain their confidence. And also, I keep saying this, that I was able to get this artistic license that meant that everything was now in my hands, and I could dictate how I wanted the project to go. And I feel that, I mean, this project has obviously been one of those projects that I guess everyone had. I mean, most architects have that, just kind of like change the trajectory or change the dynamic. So this project really spoke to that. And it just started to sort of like create this, what I would call opportunity to sort of like, explore, by virtue of me being a Muslim, about faith, form. I mean, the good thing about this as well was that once I was able to get this artistic license, the original design that we did was very generic. It was like a typical, mosque building that had all the connotations of it being an Islamic or an Islamic building. I think what we did here, because of the background that I have had of being very modern in my approach in the language that I speak with my architecture, it ended up being very modern in its design, but the experimentation that was afforded was with the materiality. And having seen that young boy living in a building that was completely made out of laterite, I thought, why not do it with this mosque now that I have this artistic license? And it just basically became more of like an experimentation that, led from this project to another project, and so on and so forth. The next project that was done, actually, funny thing is, like, the next project, can you go to the next one, please? By the way, I think what it is as well that made a huge difference was the fact that most of the projects that we work on, we design and we make them. So it's not like we design and get a contractor to build them. So it was always an opportunity to improve on, on what it is that we've done. This next project, called the MadHouse, which is an acronym for Making a Difference House, was one of those opportunities that I get where clients just say, you know what, Adi, just run with it. And when they give me that opportunity to run with it, what I found is that a lot of my money goes into these projects. Because this particular project, because of what I was trying to do with it, because everything was made up on site. Yes, we had the concept design, but every detail was something that was achieved, when we were on site. Using, I mean, they were not discarded containers, but obviously there were containers that we paid for. Actually, let me rephrase that. The containers were not necessarily paid for because the client was able to get someone to donate. I think we had like about 30 containers that were donated to him. And it obviously served us well because nothing was, every single waste or every single offcut or every single piece that was cut out in order to create the spaces inside of this building was reused. I mean, the building in the middle that you see was an old security post that was earmarked for demolition. And it was just something that I felt that the people that lived in it, the security, the people that secure the vice chancellor's, the road that leads to the vice chancellor's residence, I just didn't think that it was going to be fair for us to just displace them. That I said to the client that rather than demolish it, why do we not repurpose it? And we had a lot of offcuts from the containers that went into creating this screen that ended up sort of like being in keeping with the main structure that we created with the containers. I don't know how I'm doing for time, but I think part of this so-called responsibility and knowing that as architects, we have to do more, in the sense that we need to know about our history, our heritage within the context of Nigeria. And for me, within the context of the Southwest region where I predominantly, operate in. And it's because of that knowledge and that responsibility that we all have as architects that, if we apply ourselves, like I said, if we apply ourselves as best as we ought to, some of the projects that we've been able to work on are like the outcome of that. Because working in Nigeria is quite difficult. It's not an easy environment to work in because of how clients can be. But I think if one is conscious enough and if one applies every single understanding that will make a difference when you talk about sustainability, when you talk about preservation, and you talk about heritage, when you apply all these things into everything that you do, irrespective of it still being modern or whatever, it is important. And people like myself have gotten to a stage in our career that we have to lead by example. And if we're not representing the young ones, the young architects that are coming after us, what do we expect? I always say to the young ones that the only reason why I give you the attention and all the guidance that I think you deserve is because I'm trying to invest in my future. They're the future, so I can't let them just run wild and not try to be mindful. There was a project that we did after the MadHouse, which actually took a different kind of position, because that involved, can you go to, I think there's a picture after this. Sorry, if you can go to this. So this was more about a client reaching out to me. This particular client is someone that we've done a lot of work for. So I will call him like my go-to person who has given me a platform, or given us a platform to do so many different things. This project was his father's house. At the time that we did this back in 2020, the building was 70 years old, but it was completely derelict. And it's in a very tight spot in the Brazilian quarters of Lagos Island. And imagine going and seeing a building like this. Normally what people would do in that environment is to tear them down and knock them down. And unfortunately, there were some that actually did collapse. So everyone just believes that anything that is old in Nigeria has to be demolished. There's no sense of preservation, no sense of conservation or anything like that. But, going on this trajectory of trying to sort of like let people know that there's something that has to be done in order to make a difference. I took this, this project was offered a year before we actually started work. And why I say before we started work was because when the client first reached out to me, I went to the site, I looked at it, I looked at the environment, I said, there's no way I can do this, no way. It was too tight. It was too tight, yeah. How am I going to get, because obviously, like I said, we design and we build. How am I going to get anything to happen on this site? Aside of the fact that it was a tight site, there's this thing in Lagos Island, on Lagos Island, called the Omoniles, who would, first of all, stress you. And the stress is obviously that they will stop you from working. So there's too many things, but nonetheless, I just had a sense of responsibility, I guess, that, we saved this building. I don't want to go too much into it. What we did do as well is, that sense of ensuring that everything that was in that building that could still be salvaged, we kept. The windows that you see here that look like they've gone to the dogs, a lot of them were actually saved and kept and all that. But this part of the building, which is the main building, is what you see here. So what we now did with this part was to extend it, and we turned, this obviously was a house, but we now turned this into an apartment block. And we claimed our defensible space, because when we were building, everybody would just be sitting against the wall of the building, So, as you can see here, that's something that allowed everybody to just come in, but we just claimed our space back and I think this is obviously down to the fact that when I was still here, I worked a lot on buildings that were in conservation areas. So there was a sense of understanding of what needed to be done. I'm very proud and happy of what we've done, what we were able to achieve with this particular building, because it set an example to, other building owners in the area that started to say, oh, if you can do this, surely, you can do something with ours. But what the difference is, I talked about the difficulties that we have in Nigeria with clients, is most of the people that own these buildings in this particular neighborhood, they're like extended families. So you don't have a single point of contact to deal with. But luckily for us, with this, there was one guy who was sponsoring the whole thing. He was a money bag, so he could, he could make it happen. Even as much as he was the money bag, he had a younger brother who was giving us hell. That while we wasted space, we created a space where you could break out from your, we give them a little balcony there, but we created a space. I didn't show, or I haven't put any internal shots of what we did with the building, but he was just giving us hell, as in, and there was a time that I said, but you're not the one paying for this. Why are you giving me hell? He said, well, even though he's not the one paying for it, but he has every right to tell us what to do. It's my brother. I'm like, okay, no problem, sorry. But I just did what I thought was right, So that was another opportunity to say to, to myself and to, the young architects, and actually more to the people that own some of these kind of buildings, that you don't always have to tear these buildings down. You can preserve them. Most of the timber, the floorboards, and all the things that were in this building, we managed to save, because the wood was still in a very good condition, even though looking at it like this, you wouldn't have thought so. We obviously created some new things that was to, we made sure that it was in keeping with what we met there. So yeah, it was a successful project for us, and I'm very proud of what we were able to achieve there. And I think it led to an opportunity that was granted by an outside force. The Obel foundation that's based in Denmark had put out a call out for architects to submit an application for a teaching fellowship. And it was one of my good friends who actually put me in the know. My good friend Tosin Oshino had reached out and said, she thinks based on our approach and how we work, that, there's a lot that we might have to offer these young students. So we submitted, we submitted, and I submitted and I was able to sort of become a fellow, whereby I teamed up with Yabatech. And the whole idea at the time was that we wanted to teach students, because most times they don't get the opportunity to know how to make things. So it's not about just learning the theory, but to be a little bit more pragmatic and find ways to sort of get their hands dirty, so to speak. We did it for about 6 months. And that's one of the reasons why when in the midst of great people like yourselves that are, making that difference with the young ones that are coming up, I'm always very envious that how do you guys do it? Because the 6 months that I did, whoa. I was like, whoa. But it left a mark which I am still very interested in continuing with that. I have a very short period of time. I've spoken about so many things that probably wasn't necessary, but I just want to also talk about the influences. Like I said, when I moved back to Nigeria, I don't know how it is for Chuka, because Chuka obviously was blessed to have someone like John Godwin. We didn't have anyone to sort of mentor us until I now came across a gentleman, Baba Adeyemo, who, kind of in a way I'm following in his footsteps, in the sense that he's the type of architect. Well, Chuka would say he's not an architect, but a self-taught. It's just the same way that one can say that Tadao Ando didn't,
artist architect.
Yes, yeah, maybe that's the way to do it. That's how to leave it. Yeah, so he was someone that I got close to, just to understand, not that I do the kind of architecture that he does, but it was just really about understanding how to think about, the environment that I am actually practicing as an architect. Because I'm in Nigeria now. I've been working there for 18, 19 years now. And I think, I need to be able to do the right thing from my own perspective or my own point of view. And I think meeting up with him and learning from him has actually served me well. But there's another African architect that, his principles and his philosophies actually resonate with me, and that's Hassan Fathi, the Egyptian architect, because I still think that it is important to find ways to build for the not so well-to-do, and it is about what type of architecture are you going to build then, other than an architecture that is, the resources are from the soil, from the environment where you need to execute these builds. And it's about creating a mindset with the clients where you can become self-reliant and, forming communities where you can start to create your own environment. And I want to be part of that, at least to, provide them with my expertise. But yes, the question that I want to leave on everybody's mind really is, when we're talking about accent and we're talking about language and we're talking about that. For the people that are in this environment, I mean, what language or what accent is the architecture that you're speaking, and what determines it? Because I believe that Nana is something that is, I mean, it's not unique to just Nigeria. It is unique. I mean, it's something that is, or it is something that should be everywhere. But let's see. We'll see how that works. But yeah, I don't want to take too much more of everyone's time. I know my presentation was a little bit all over the place, but I think the objective, or what I'm trying to preach, really is about, because let me put it like this: you're not anything until you've gone out of Nigeria and speak to what you believe in, and it's received, or it's listened, or you're listened to, or you're in the midst of people that, I guess, people in Nigeria are now listening and thinking, that for me to have been able to come here and speak to you guys, then it must mean that I have something to say. And yes, I do have something to say. I might not necessarily be the best person to sort of like speak on what it is that I do. I mean, I've always been quite somehow about it, but nonetheless, I try to do it with the work that I do, and I'm still learning how to speak on it, or speak about it, and put it out there. But I'm hoping that the work that has been done thus far is enough to give a level of confidence that we're doing our bit for the universe in Nigeria, in our little corner. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.